Sacred attention therapy is an approach to liberation. The first liberation is from the conditioned self, psychology of early life. The second liberation is from the realization of the true nature, the fulfillment of oneself as a personality. And the third liberation is the liberation into the life of spirituality and spiritual practice. Sacred attention therapy, or SAT, is a meta-psychology because it embraces not only the physical, emotional, mental and energetic aspects of the human being, but also the spiritual and the transcendental. Therefore, it is uniquely placed to be an applied psychology through counselling and psychotherapy in the 21st century, in which human beings are more complex than ever before.
Welcome to the fifth in a series of online interviews with Richard Harvey. My name is Rob Meeker. Today's interview will discuss the lecture, Now. Enlightenment Has Always Been. This lecture is available in written form in Moksha Dawn, an ebook you can order from the books page of the Sacred Attention Therapy website. You can listen to the full recording of many of these lectures on the lectures page. And lastly, you can view many other interviews on the videos page of the Sacred Attention Therapy website and our YouTube channel. The web page address for our website is www.sacredattentiontherapy.com. And on our website, you can click on the YouTube channel icon to view our YouTube channel. A little bit of background about Richard Harvey. Richard is a psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He's the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a three-stage model of human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and The Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all around the world, and his forthcoming book is entitled Your Sacred Calling. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Richard to the call.
Seems a long time, Robert. We've only missed a few days of our regular interviews, but it seems a long time.
It does seem like it's been a while, and it's nice to be with you.
And with you.
This lecture, Now, Enlightenment Has Always Been, there's four statements right at the beginning of the lecture that found or form the foundation of the entire lecture. And it's these four statements that I'd like us to share in dialogue today. And these are the four statements, and this is how the lecture begins. Quote, now is a fallacy. Now is at best relaxation. Now is of no use to the sadhu because it is relative to past and future. And the fourth statement is, now is unreal and therefore unattainable. To begin, those four statements or propositions as a collection, where and how did these statements reveal themselves to you? And When did you learn this?
I recall them coming spontaneously, and I learned it even as you said it just now, of course, yet again. There is only one reference of the four statements that I'm aware of, and I pulled it down off my shelf just before we started to remind myself, and it's a book, wonderful book by Swami Chinmayananda, and it's probably my favorite interpretation of the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. It's called the Holy Gita. It's extremely well known. And in this, this is a thick book. It's not just the Bhagavad Gita, which, as you know, is about this big, but it does have this marvelous commentary by Chinmayananda, who perhaps is, I don't know if it's fair to say, but not ignored, but he's maybe not given as much room as other 20th century Indian gurus. A profound man, it's a wonderful legacy. Encourage us all to look more into his life. But Chinmayananda says at some point in interpreting and quoting some of the holy Vedas in this book, in his commentary on the Gita, that now is not real any more than the past and the future. And when I read that many years ago, immersed as I was in the humanistic tradition, and now, and that whole doctrine of now, if you will, comes from the, or at least to my mind, it comes from the humanistic transpersonal tradition. Of course, it's thousands of years old if you're Eastern, but for us in the 1970s, it was a lightning strike. People would say, be present, be now, and we go, what? I have no idea what this could possibly mean. And it was a wonderful doctrine in Gestalt therapy and in our psychotherapy groups and in our consciousness raising. Can you be present? Answer, no, because I'm always figuring it out and I'm always planning, all this obvious sort of stuff. So to come upon Chinmayananda saying, look, now's no better than then or in front of us, is profound in the extreme to me, and to be reminded that this is an ancient teaching, and that therefore, and perhaps this is the challenging thing to say, what has happened in the 21st century with so-called spiritual teachers and with doctrines that appear spiritual is certain elements of consciousness raising, self-realization have been, and this is possibly my word, fetishized, turned into a fetish, turned into something absolute when they are merely temporal. They are merely practical and useful. For me, for you, for all of us as human beings, it's been immensely important to consider the doctrine of now. But why? To actually bring us up to speed, so to speak, with our own lives. Now in and of itself has no meaning outside of eternity. And that's what I want to say primarily about these four statements. That's why, or that's how I understand those four statements which appeared spontaneously.
The first of the four, to pick up and use your latest comment as a foyer into exploring each of the four statements. The first of the four is now is a fallacy. And you close out this beginning section of the lecture on now is fallacy by sharing the following. And it's a couple of paragraphs, and bear with me, because I'm going to share this as much for those listening and watching as for us engaged in the dialogue. No trying, because no effort is needed to come to where you already are. No you, because no individual self can themselves become enlightened. No do, because it is not an activity, so trying is not required. Finally, no it, because it is not objective. Neither is it subjective. In fact, there is no point of view whatsoever from which to describe enlightenment. There is no description of enlightenment, and yet there is nothing other than enlightenment. Enlightenment is the real state and condition. It is not, strictly speaking, a state or condition at all, but I am attempting to communicate with you. Moreover, I am attempting to transmit something to you. That something is beyond thought or concepts of any kind. It is beyond space and beyond time. End quote. And I wanted to ask you, Richard, how can a reader begin to make sense, okay, of that passage that I just read? No trying, no already are, no you, no do, no it. Yet enlightenment is a real state and condition?
It's possible that I fall foul of my self-imposed task, which is to make profound spiritual truths accessible to people. It's possible that sometimes I just don't make it, and it's possible that sometimes you just don't get there. Alongside that, however, is the fact that only when you approach contradiction and paradox, this has come up in the lectures many times, that is in itself a gauge of the borderline. I'm working increasingly with people who have dreams, because I work with dreams a fair amount, of the seashore. Now, the seashore is a wonderful symbol for the meeting of consciousness and unconsciousness, or the known and the unknown, or the human and the divine, or that over which we appear to have control and organization, and then this to which we will surrender. For example, the tidal wave dream, increasingly common. The tsunami dream, the being taken over by water motif, this kind of thing. Now, what happens in this seashore place, the meeting of the conscious mind with eternity itself, the blue, the blue, is contradiction and paradox. And that's why the sincere seeker after truth needs to be prepared to not speak or understand or believe or have faith or be able to utter things that are sensible in a cerebral, mental way, we might say, a left-brained way, a logical way. In fact, the opposite is true, that only when you begin to say things which contradict themselves and are paradoxical and seemingly illogical and irrational, are you approaching this borderline place, this meeting of the conscious and the unconscious. And I think that what that passage says to me and says to us, and hopefully could communicate if we read it 2-3 times, which is what I tend to ask people who read my material to do, is allow it to seep in and then see that what it's saying in summary is that here in this realm of space-time, I, you, and it, in some relationship, we always have this 3 levels to our so-called reality, and that reality is rather like if you took a wonderful, huge, round mirror and you were able to break it into 3 parts and then say, look, the one is now 3. And yet, what's being reflected in it would appear to be 3, but in fact it's still 1. It's only 3 in the mirror. We live, as it were, in the mirror, the reflection of the divine, of the unity state. And that's why we hark after the unity state, at the same time apprehending that there's you, there's me, and there's this other thing going on all the time. So in exploding the myth of it, or doing, or effort, or trying, or I, or any other things in the passage you just read, I'm indicating and I'm pointing to the unknown, the source, consciousness, the divine itself, in the way that we can even begin to talk about it from point of view of the 3 parts of the mirror. And it will always sound, it's even a gauge, it will always sound illogical, paradoxical, and contradictory.
With passages like that, I I tend to invite the student not to try and make sense of it in the head, but make sense of it in the heart.
Quite.
One will often short circuit if they try and make sense of it in the head, intellectually. It's something that has to be felt in the heart.
The intellect isn't up to it.
Yeah. When discussing the second of the four statements, which is now is at best relaxation, you share the following, and it's 3 paragraphs, so again, I invite your patience. Quote, "The now concept should have stayed where it started out. It was a means of reaching relaxation because mostly people are stressed, anxious, angry, restless, and confused. Therefore, they worry, plan, anticipate, fret, and mentally organize. A means of relaxation is necessary to calm us down and return us to ourselves. But remedial work on the soul and spirit should not be confused with spiritual practice. One is the foundation, the other is the building. Remedial psychological and soulful work must be done. These are the foundations. You must learn to breathe, to allow the body to become loose, adopt good habits, silence, meditation, inspirational literature, don't gossip. You must persist in these and other good, helpful practices until you are sufficiently prepared and ready for the spiritual journey. This is the building. It may not happen in another way or in another order. So now being present, this is a significant practice for returning us to an awareness of our true human potential. But it is not a spiritual practice. It merely relaxes and brings you to a state of psychological readiness. Being present is your arrival at base camp." End quote. And so what I wanted to ask is, what happens to the student of inner work when they have done the remedial work, the work of relaxation, and they arrive at base camp?
They tackle the ascent, of course. They they tackle the ascent, which is a metaphor, and it means sadhana. It means lifelong spiritual practice. It means a constant engagement with the unity, with the divine. It means all of the challenges that come to the devotee who is committed. There is no way back at this point. There's 2 points in my way of speaking and teaching and modeling this human development at this time, and there's 2 points where there's no going back. There's 2 one-way tickets, so to speak. The first is the second birth, or the birth into transformation, or into what we call the second level of awareness, second level of awakening and awareness, and so on. And that is a one-way ticket from the confines of the personality and character restrictions. It's a basic egoic forsaking, you might say, which is all related to the past. But the second time you take the one-way ticket is the one where you finish what, in fact, all of this series of lectures that we're presently discussing, the Novena teachings, is all about. They are a summary of the preparation for sadhana. In other words, you process time and now and what else is it? Anger and compassion and what have you, and all these things. You revision all of these things in a sense from the psychological to the spiritual. They're not the same. So they have to all be revised or revisioned in ritual. And in this particular one, now is, or time, of course, is crucial, utterly crucial.
It's interesting you mention that, utterly crucial, because it brings to my mind, how do the adepts, or how have the adepts dealt with the issue? And that, I'm going to use it as an invitation to go into the third of the 4 statements. And the third statement was, now is of no use to the sadhu because it is relevant to past and future. I'll repeat that. Now is of no use to the sadhu because it is relative to past and future. You go on to say, quote, this statement means that present time is as useless as past or future time in search of liberation, end quote. This seems to contradict, and you mentioned that it does contradict much, if not all, of modern populist spiritual literature, and I would agree with you. You then go on to share the following paragraph. The present is unreal. What is between the past and the future is non-existent. The present fluctuates and change. These are strong statements, revealing statements, and true statements. Never before or since has there been an examination of what is real or the truth of the depth and scope of the Vedanta, the oldest spiritual records of humanity. Never has such an examination of time and reality been offered to us. Today, it is rare that a soul will arise who can equal this depth of inquiry, and it is rare also for us to be patient and applied enough to understand, end quote. And what I wanted to ask is, how can we reconcile the preponderance of the, quote, modern populist spiritual literature, end quote, with the Vedanta, the oldest spiritual records of humanity, when they appear to be sharing very different teachings?
I reconcile, perhaps recognize that as an overall backdrop, again a theme often of these lectures from me is that these are the dark times, and therefore it squares up with that idea that those admitting knowledge or wisdom to us in the spiritual realms may well be compromised in some way. Many spiritual teachers, in my view, and certainly in regard to my model, are confusing psychology with spirituality. That's not to say that that hasn't virtually always been the case. There is a Buddhist psychology. You could argue there is a psychology, there is indeed a physics, chemistry, all sorts of anthropology in the Vedanta. You could argue it's always been the case. However, what hasn't always been the case is the confusion and the obfuscation, by which I mean, a real barrier of the last 50 years in the minds of spiritual seekers. And what we've got to catch up with is, in the last 50 years, this thing's happened. I mean, this difference, which is, as I endlessly say, not that long ago, 150, 200 years ago, less in certain instances, to stand up and state your own beliefs, spiritually, religiously, in terms of God, meant that you would be hung, drawn and quartered in the platha. Now that's true in England, it's true in your country, it's true in where I live now, here in Spain. These are recent, a few generations back. We now stand up and say whatever we like about spirituality and religion and God and all of this, and everyone like, oh, ho-hum. Why? This is too long for us to discuss, but there are 2 or 3 points in the series of lectures where I've brought in and discussed briefly, at least, the 20th century, and just what a massive trauma that is to the collective. And it has been a massive trauma, and religion has never been as important worldwide as it was since 100 years ago, give or take. By the end of the First World War, for example, because God let us down in a big way. So, atheism or looking for alternatives gave rise to the so-called New Age, and nowadays we have the luxury of, what do you think about God? And what do you call him? Call him what you want to call him. He's a her, he's an it, he's a blah blah, he's a whatever. And it's all getting very silly because it becomes very personal. In a sense, everybody is their own or has their own or writes their own Bible or their own holy book or their own morality or their own set of exercises and so on, with the accompanying dangers of that. Yet, my own feeling about that is that what we have to do is work with what we've got and see that the individual selfhood is the way now in the 21st century. You can't take away this extraordinary self-consciousness that's been birthing in us collectively for the last 100 years plus, but really since the 19th century, historically, sociologically, due to circumstances. So we work with that because it's so incredibly valuable, and we recognize that each of us has an independent, based on self, set of beliefs and ways to God. We don't try and take that away. This is what we have. And it's very, very important that we have it. Now, when a spiritual teacher, a modern day guru, someone writing about spirituality comes to the fore, inevitably, currently at this time, they are compromised gurus, in my view. It means that they have to blur the edges of psychology and spirituality. They have to generalize. They have to talk to many people who all have, possibly in a sense, unique ideas and beliefs and experiences and practices. They have to somehow appeal to the commonality of people, and they themselves, it's probably more important that they have a certain look about them and a certain feeling about them, that they have published works and other things, than that they ply deeply into the depths of spiritual teaching, which largely, probably in this generation, the majority of people will never see or hear, let alone practice. My concern is not to change that. My concern is to keep a light that says, when we're ready and when it's come around again, here the teachings, we point the way, so to speak, and we say, look, it was given a long time ago. And not only that, we can reframe it, we can take the very essence of it and make it relevant for the modern era and the future modern era, to adapt, not to fetishize. It doesn't have to be Indian, it doesn't have to be Buddhist, it doesn't have to be mystical Christian. It has to be true. Truth is true. Reality is real. And so my concern there is to maintain it in a healthy condition for future generations.
I want to invite us to look at the last of these four statements to close our time off here this morning. Well, morning my time, it's afternoon where you are in Spain there, Richard.
It's a comment on now there, isn't it?
There we go. The final proposition of the four of the lecture is as follows, quote, now is unreal and therefore unattainable, end quote. I'll repeat it. Now is unreal and therefore unattainable. And along with that, I've drawn out a paragraph that I want to share with you and our listeners. The only thing that is real is the divine truth. Anything else is unreal. Now, the present somewhere along the line got muddled up with reality and it became confused with this word presence. Presence comes from the Latin presentia, being present or carriage, demeanor, or aspect. Rather than to a mysterious inroad to the spirit, it refers to the quality of our character or personality. Are we present? Are we energetically engaged in life? This is the meaning of presence. It has no deeper meaning. by association, we might say that engagement with life, a sense of being here, serves as the foundation, the base camp, or the preparation for the deeper matters of psychological and spiritual practice. But that is all. And what I wanted to ask to conclude our time here today, Richard, is how did society get so muddled up with the reality and become confused with the word presence?
I think that the history of religion and spirituality, and I'm answering this in a broad way, reflects our ability to somehow be with the superficial. And I don't want to go into too many totems and taboos here, but what if, for example, to take one obvious one, the word that's translated as virgin from the Aramaic in the Gospels actually simply means young girl, and the idea that a young girl gave birth to the baby Jesus is very different to the legends around the virgin who gave birth to these sorts of things. We take these things, we do what Campbell called concretize the symbols. We love not only conspiracy theory, but we love the mystery, we love the mysterious, we love the magical, we love this things that are sort of hard to explain, and we settle with them in this fetish kind of a way, and we attach to them without really wanting or needing to go any deeper. I mean, one obvious one and more profound I'd like to bring in here is death, for example. What's death? What if death is a chimera, which means an imaginary thing we're scared of? What if death is just a screen, a kind of, a poster or something of a garish kind of blood-dripping monster or something, or tubes in the hospital, or a terrible accident, or all the scenarios. What if it is? Because when you look at that, what I was speaking about from dreams very often, this borderline idea of paradox and contradiction where the unconscious meets the conscious. At what point do you meet that borderline? It's the same exploration as if you and I are in relationship or even in a room and we say, hi, where's this point where you are and I'm not? Where actually is it? Where is it really? So where really is the so-called borderline between the known and the unknown, conscious and unconscious? Where's the borderline between life and afterlife that we call death? And what if it isn't anything at all? Any more than there's anything between you and I? Because if, from a point of view of spirituality, from a point of view of Chinmayananda's commentary on the Holy Gita, from point of view of the Vedanta, from point of view of, we won't mention the names, but the implication in the modern day spiritual teachers of what really could it possibly be now, when what we really see is the past, and by implication, the future. What's this? Is it anything at all? Arguably it isn't. Arguably it's a kind of intersection without any depth, without any height, without any thickness at all. Now we approach a spiritual truth, and one that again has been an ongoing theme of the lectures, which is there's only one fear. And that fear is a chimera, and that chimera is there is no death. What do you got to be afraid of? Now fear kind of goes like this. Fear of anything goes like this, because if there is only one, and if that's just a sort of intersection, a bit like I leave this room after this talk with you, what am I afraid of? Nothing, because I know this room over here. If I didn't, maybe I would be anxious. Last thing I just want to mention briefly is perhaps we could consider this. Everybody, all of us, who have had even one numinous experience, by which I mean we fall through the cracks of time, we fall through that space and contradiction and paradox, through down the borderline somehow from this ongoing narrative of our lives from birth to death and everything. We do it in meditation, we do it spontaneously. Some people do it who are not even spiritual. They actually do it, and you talk to them, and something happened. They saw a light. Never saw it again, but they knew that they were free, they knew that they were with their loved ones, they knew that God existed, whatever it was. And they never did a spiritual sadhana for the rest of their lives, but they had this thing there. So it happens to millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't there, I suggest, if you look into it, and I've looked into it quite a lot, one very common aspect of the numinous experience, and that very common aspect is this: eternity. Time stops. Time is immaterial. There isn't time. There is no past. There is no future. But most importantly, and for this discussion, of course, there isn't even now. What there is, if any of us and any of them and all of us get together and put our heads together, the eternal. That's all. And it's an expansive, illimitable illumination and freedom.
Let's leave it with that beautiful thought.
Thank you.
When we come together the next time, disenchantment is the next lecture in this Novena series teaching, and I look forward to discussing it with you, Richard.
As do I, Robert.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye for now.